This is Harold. He was a hard-working electrician and mechanic. On October 31st, 2020, Harold died. Now, this isn't too unusual. A lot of people die. But what made this different was what Harold left behind. Put simply, a mess. To be more specific, he left 10 acres of cars, boats, trucks, motorcycles, RVs, tractors, storage containers, barns, buildings, and junk. And it became my job to sort it all out. I'm Clint, his long-suffering stepson. For the last 4 years, I've spent all my free time in the middle of the desert in southern New Mexico cleaning up Harold's mess. Now, I didn't want to do this, but my poor dear mom asked me to help, and she's been dealing with this for 40 years, so I couldn't say no. But she didn't always make it easy.
So I can... Yes, I know. Can you get me one of those bags so I can... Now, you may be asking yourself, why did Harold have all this stuff? Why did he have all this junk, all these cars, all this trash? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Harold had a lot of mental issues.
For starters, he had a compulsive buying disorder. This is characterized by frequent buying episodes or impulses to buy that are experienced as irresistible or senseless. The spending behavior and impulses lead to personal distress, social, marital, or occupational dysfunction, and to financial or legal problems. Basically, people with this disorder are addicted to buying stuff, even when it makes no sense to buy stuff. And that's what Harold did. He bought stuff, all kinds of stuff. Stuff he didn't need, stuff he could never use, stuff that cost a lot of money, stuff that hardly cost any money at all.
See this wrench, $1.99 for this.
Any stuff he could find. He bought it when he had money, he bought it when he didn't have money, and subsequently, he was always broke. About 10 years before he died, Harold owed over $80,000 to credit cards. He owed so much he couldn't make the payments and had to settle with them, cashing in his pension to do so. And when he did die, he owed $40,000 on my mom's credit cards, and she had to cash in his life insurance just to pay them off. And all because he couldn't stop buying this meaningless stuff. Also, he was a hoarder. This disorder is pretty easy to figure out. It includes the acquisition of and failure to discard a large number of possessions that appear to be useless. Living places are cluttered, and the disorder causes significant distress or impairment in functioning. Harold didn't get rid of anything. He kept every single thing he ever got, from all the mail he received to everything he ever bought. And to hold it all, he had to keep building barns or buildings, or he kept buying things to put that stuff in, like trailers or shipping containers. And talk about cluttered, let's just walk through the front yard of the house. All these things, all these cars, all this junk, all of it broken down and no use to anyone. But to Harold, all of this was gold. It was his treasure. Finally, Harold had a serious case of paranoid personality disorder. Now, this is a mental health condition marked by a pattern of distrust and suspicion of others without adequate reason to be suspicious. People with PPD are always on guard, believing that others are constantly trying to demean, harm, or threaten them. Harold thought people were actively trying to steal his stuff. He would hear them at night, whispering about it. He roamed his property with a flashlight and a gun, looking for them. To make sure they didn't steal his stuff, he locked everything up, behind gates and fences, padlocks and barricades. He had closed-circuit cameras mounted to all the buildings, motion sensors and lights to let him know when people were sneaking around outside.
Look, nobody would want this junk. Nobody but Harold, that is. And he spent his life buying it and then dumping it all over his property. Speaking of property,
Harold lived on 7 acres in the desert. On this 7 acres, he had 5 buildings, a semi-trailer, a shipping container, the back end of a Pepsi truck, 2 full-size buses, and a camper. Plus, there were all these other random things and places, like the back of this old truck and this small building next to their house. Each of these was filled, literally from floor to ceiling, with junk. Remember when I said he was paranoid? Protecting each of these places was at least 1, but usually 2 or 3 padlocks. He also attached these metal boxes to the doors. Inside these boxes is another lock. The box was to make sure you couldn't easily cut the lock off, meaning it made it harder for me to get into them. Oftentimes, he also put other things in front of the doors of these places. Sometimes it was a trailer, sometimes it was a huge broken-down truck. But in every case, it meant I'd have to move these things before I could even get to the door to cut the locks off. These locks were combination locks, well, most of them. For those, when I could get to them, I cut them off. For those with keys, I tried to find the right key to unlock it. If I couldn't find it, then I'd have to cut it off. Incidentally, while cutting these locks off, I noticed other locks littering the ground around these doors, all of them cut in half or otherwise ruined. Did I mention Harold also had early onset dementia? He was having a real issue remembering things, so he used these combination locks to protect his stuff, but then he forgot the combination, and then he had to cut the locks off these buildings when he wanted to get into them. Aside from the 7 acres of property he lived on, he also owned another 3 acres nearby. Now, on these 3 acres, we find two more shipping containers, barricaded with a tractor and panel truck, of course, as well as more cars and tractors, boats, and RVs. He even had a jet ski at this place. But my main focus would be here, the larger chunk of land holding all the barns and buildings. I had to get into each of them, find out what was in them, and then clean them out. At the same time, I also had to help my mom clean off the rest of the property too. Harold had all these wrecked cars and refrigerators, toilets, washing machines, stoves, and dryers laying around. So while I was going through these buildings, I also needed to get all this junk removed and taken somewhere else. Oh, another important detail is that this was my mom's inheritance. Harold drained their bank account every month to buy this junk. So while going through all this, I had to find the stuff of value and then sell it off to help my mom pay her bills. Speaking of value, let's take a quick look at the stuff that Harold collected. See, by design, there's little rhyme or reason in the actions of hoarders and compulsive buyers, and this was especially true for Harold. Take this stock trailer, for example. Ideal for hauling horses or cattle. He bought this about a year before he died for about $2,000. It's not in bad shape as stock trailers go, though it is a bit old and showing its age. Here's the thing, though. Harold didn't have any cows. Harold didn't have any horses. He didn't plan on buying any. What the hell did he need a stock trailer for? Answer, he didn't, but that's what compulsive buyers do. And so my job was to go through all that stuff, through all those buildings and trailers, cutting through locks and removing those barricades so I could help clean up his mess. Needless to say, this wouldn't be easy. It was without a doubt difficult, sometimes dangerous, and other times kind of disturbing.
You're a sick man, Harold.
But every now and then, when sorting through all the junk, all the trash, all the wrecked cars and refuse, on occasion I'd find something valuable. And that's what makes this job so fun, not to mention rewarding.
Oh, wow.
So join me as I go through each of these buildings, one by one, to find all the crazy stuff Harold bought over the last 40 years. Who knows what we might find here on Harold's estate. And be sure to like, subscribe, and share so you never miss one of the treasure hunts.